My father liked to tell people I was the mistake he kept around out of charity, the uneducated daughter who never finished anything she started. Standing in the shadows of the Merriwick Civic Trust dinner, I watched him laugh at my expense, unaware that the quiet woman he mocked was a fiction. He thought I was worthless, but inside my locked briefcase sat the only evidence that could keep him, and this entire town, from collapsing into ruin. The voicemail had been sitting in my inbox for 3 days before I finally listened to it. My father's voice sounded exactly the way I remembered. A rough baritone that always seemed to be straining for authority, like a man trying to shout down a storm that only he could hear. He told me there was a family obligation. He told me it was the annual dinner for the Merriwick Civic Trust. He told me that if I had any respect for the sacrifices he had made, I would be there. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask where I was living or if I had enough money to buy gas to get there. He just issued a summons. I drove into Merriwick on a Tuesday afternoon, the sky the color of a bruised plum. The town looked smaller than I remembered, or perhaps I had just grown used to places where the buildings scraped the clouds and the money flowed like an electric current underground. Here, the poverty was quiet and stubborn. It lived in the peeling paint of the Victorian houses that lined the lake and the shuttered storefronts on Main Street. The sign welcoming visitors to the historic district was tilted slightly to the left, as if the town itself was tired of holding it up. I checked into a motel on the edge of town, a place that smelled of lemon polish and stale cigarettes. I unpacked my suit, a gray, shapeless thing I had bought specifically for this trip. It was the kind of suit worn by a woman who filed paperwork in a basement, a woman who had given up on being noticed. It was a costume, just like the slump in my shoulders and the hesitation I practiced in the mirror. When I arrived at the venue, the local country club, the air was thick with the scent of roast beef and heavy perfume. The Merriwick Civic Trust dinner was the highlight of the social calendar. A chance for the town's remaining elite to pretend that the local economy was not slowly bleeding out. I spotted my father, Gerald Peterson, standing near the head table. He was holding a glass of scotch, his face flushed with the heat of the room and the thrill of holding court. He looked older, the lines around his mouth were deeper, etched by years of frowning at a world that refused to give him what he thought he deserved. I walked toward him, keeping my eyes on the floor. "Claire," he said, "you made it." He did not hug me. He gestured to the people standing around him, a group of men in suits that were a little too shiny and women who held their clutches like shields. "Everyone, this is my daughter, Claire," he announced. His voice carried over the din of the room. "She is currently between opportunities." Again, a ripple of polite laughter moved through the circle. I forced a small, apologetic smile. "She is thinking about taking another one of those online courses," Gerald continued, grinning as he swirled his drink. "You know the ones. You print the certificate yourself on your home printer," I told her. "Claire, you can't pay the rent with a piece of paper you printed at the library." The laughter was louder this time. It was a cruel sound, sharp and knowing. These people did not know me. They did not know that 3 days ago I had been sitting in a glass-walled conference room in Chicago, outlining a forensic audit strategy for a Fortune 500 company. They saw what Gerald told them to see: a failure, a drifter, a woman of 32 who had never launched. "I am just trying to figure out my next step." "Dad," I said softly. Gerald clapped a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and possessive. "Well, don't take too long," he said. "I can't keep waiting for you to grow up." I nodded, accepting the humiliation as the price of admission. It was better this way. If they thought I was stupid, they would not guard their words. If they thought I was worthless, they would not notice when I watched them. And I was watching them. I took a glass of water from a passing tray and drifted toward the edge of the room. My training kicked in automatically. I scanned the crowd, looking for the outliers, the people whose body language did not match the celebratory tone of the evening. That was when I saw Hank Reller. I remembered Hank from when I was a child. He was a contractor who had made a small fortune paving driveways and fixing roofs. A man who always seemed to be shouting into a cell phone. Tonight, he was wearing a navy suit that pulled tight across his chest. He was standing near the emergency exit, tapping furiously on his phone. He was not drinking. He was not smiling. Every few seconds, his eyes darted toward my father, then back to the screen in his hand. He looked like a man who was waiting for a bomb to go off. I moved slightly closer, pretending to examine a floral arrangement. Hank shoved his phone into his pocket and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked sick, not physically ill, but terrified. He caught my eye and frowned, dismissing me instantly. To him, I was just Gerald's disappointment. I was part of the furniture. Claire. The voice was cool and melodic. I turned to see my half-sister, Dana Whitlock, standing behind me. She looked perfect. Her hair was a sleek curtain of gold, and her dress was tailored to within an inch of its life. On her arm was a man I did not know, though he had the polished, easy look of someone who had never worried about an overdraft fee. "Hello, Dana," I said. She leaned in and kissed the air near my cheek. "You look tired." "Claire," she said. "It was a long drive." I said. Dana turned to the man beside her. "This is Elliot," she said. "My fiancé. Elliot, this is Claire, my sister." Elliot smiled and extended a hand. His grip was firm, but his eyes were kind. "It is nice to meet you, Claire. Dana has told me a lot about you. I bet she has." I said. Dana laughed, a tinkling sound that lacked any real warmth. "Oh, stop. I just told him how much you value your freedom. It must be nice, really, not being tied down to a career path. I feel like I'm married to the bank sometimes. But I suppose that is the cost of real success." She patted my arm. "I heard you are looking for work again. I'm keeping my options open." I said. "Well, do not aim too high at first," she said. "You know how you get overwhelmed. Remember when you tried to do that paralegal program? You quit after 2 months. I did not quit. I wanted to say, I had to leave because my identity was compromised, and I had to scrub my entire digital footprint to avoid being sued for a fraud I did not commit. But I could not say that. I remember. I said, just focus on finishing something." Dana said, "Anything. It would mean so much to Dad. He worries. You know, he hates telling people you are struggling." I felt a flash of heat in my chest, a spark of the old anger. Dana had always been the golden child, the one with the MBA and the pristine reputation. She did not know that her success was partially subsidized by the lies Gerald told about me. He built her up by tearing me down, creating a binary world where one daughter was the savior and the other was the sinkhole. "I am doing my best." I said. "I am sure you are," she said, her voice dripping with pity. She steered Elliot away toward the bar, leaving me alone with my water. I took a deep breath, counting to 4. I needed to stay focused. I was not here to fight with Dana. I was here to understand why Gerald had called me. I circled the room again, moving toward the buffet tables where the older members of the trust were gathered. I saw Ruth Mallory sitting at a small table near the wall. Ruth was a fixture in Marowak, a former school principal who had served on the trust board for 20 years. She was eating a piece of cake with a fork, her movements slow and deliberate. I approached her table. "Mrs. Mallory?" I asked. She looked up, squinting through thick glasses. "Claire Peterson," she said. "I wondered if that was you. You look like your mother around the eyes." "It has been a long time," I said. She put down her fork. "It has. We do not see much of you. Gerald says you live in Ohio." Gerald said a lot of things. I did not live in Ohio. I lived in a high-security apartment in Boston under the name Sarah Bennett. "I move around," I said. Ruth looked at me for a long moment, her gaze penetrating. She lowered her voice. "Your father is in high spirits tonight. He enjoys the attention." I said, "He enjoys the illusion," she corrected. She glanced toward the head table, where Gerald was now laughing loudly at something Hank Reller was saying. Hank had finally joined the party, though he still looked pale. "Be careful, Claire," Ruth said softly. "Careful of what?" Ruth pushed her plate away. "This town is not what it used to be. People are desperate. And when people are desperate, they stop reading the fine print. Your father is a proud man. He likes to be the one who signs the checks. He likes to be the one people thank. She looked back at me. Sometimes a man will sign his name to things just to feel important. He is in deeper than he thinks with the finances. She would not say more. She picked up her purse and stood, smoothing her skirt. It was nice to see you. Claire, tell your sister congratulations for me. I watched her walk away, my pulse quickening, in deeper than he thinks. It was the first solid piece of information I had received. I looked back at Gerald. He was clapping Hank on the back, beaming. He looked like a king. But kings were often the last to know when the castle was burning. The dinner ended an hour later. I tried to slip away to the parking lot, but Gerald caught me before I could reach my car. The cool night air did nothing to sober him up. He cornered me near the trunk of my rental sedan, his breath smelling of stale scotch and mints. "Where do you think you are going?" he demanded. "I am tired." "Dad," I said, "I am going to the motel." "You embarrass me," he hissed. His mood had shifted instantly from jovial to vicious. "I invite you here, to an event with the most important people in the county. And you stand in the corner like a scared dog. You do not talk to anyone. You do not network. It is pathetic." "I spoke to Dana," I said. "I spoke to Mrs. Mallory. Ruth Mallory is a dinosaur." He spat. "You should have been talking to the developers. You should have been trying to find a job. Do you think I want to support you forever? You do not support me." "Dad," I said, "I haven't taken a dime from you in 10 years. He waved his hand, dismissing the fact. "It is the principle. Claire, you are a drain on my spirit. Look at Dana. She is thriving. She brings a man like Elliot Crane into the family. What do you bring? Nothing. You are uneducated and you are worthless." The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Worthless. Uneducated. He used those words like weapons. He knew they were the things I was supposed to be sensitive about. He did not know that I had a master's degree in forensic accounting. He did not know that I spoke 3 languages. He did not know that I was the person companies called when they lost millions of dollars and did not know who to blame. I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. He was terrified of being small. He needed me to be smaller so he could feel tall. "I am sorry." "Dad," I said, "it was a strategic apology. It was the only way to make him stop. I did not mean to embarrass you. I will do better tomorrow." He grunted, somewhat mollified by my submission. "See that you do. Go get some sleep. You look terrible." He turned and walked back toward the club, his gait uneven. I waited until he was inside before I got into my car. My hands were steady as I started the engine. I did not cry. I had stopped crying over Gerald Peterson a long time ago. I drove back to the motel in silence. The town was dark now, the streetlights casting long, yellow shadows on the cracked pavement. I parked in front of my room and double-locked the door behind me. The room was exactly as I had left it. I went to the closet and pulled out my hard case. It was a sleek black aluminum briefcase with a biometric lock. I pressed my thumb against the sensor, and it clicked open. Inside lay the tools of my real life: a high-end laptop with military-grade encryption, a burner phone, a thin folder labeled C. Peterson, Do Not Disclose. I sat at the small, wobbly desk and opened the laptop. The screen glowed blue, a familiar comfort. I typed in my password, a string of characters that changed every week, and logged into the secure server. I was not Claire Peterson. The failure. I was an analyst for Northbridge Risk Analytics. I hunted fraud. I traced hidden assets. I destroyed the lives of corrupt executives who thought they were untouchable. I had built this identity out of necessity. 6 years ago, a man I trusted had used my name to launder money through a shell company. I was 26, naive, and eager to please. When the feds came knocking, he vanished, leaving me holding the bag. I avoided prison only because I had kept meticulous notes, proving I was a patsy and not a conspirator, but my name was ruined in the industry. Google my real name, and you found accusations, lawsuits, and scandal. So I killed Claire Peterson. I became someone else. I got my credentials under a new identity, a legal loophole, I paid a lawyer $20,000 to exploit. I worked in the shadows. I never took credit. I never appeared in photos. I was a ghost, but now the ghost was back in Merriwick. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of public records I had pulled before the trip. The Merriwick Civic Trust, Gerald Peterson, treasurer, Hank Reller, board member. The trust was supposed to be a charity. It funded scholarships, park maintenance, and the local library, but the numbers I had found online did not add up. The administrative costs were 40% higher than the industry average. There were transfers to vendors that had no websites and no physical addresses. Ruth Mallory was right. Gerald was in deep. I was about to close the laptop when the burner phone on the desk buzzed. It made me jump. Only 3 people in the world had this number, and none of them would be calling me at midnight on a Tuesday. I picked it up. It was a text message from an unknown number. The area code was local. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. The message was short, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. If you are back in Merriwick, stay away from the trust. Your father signed things he did not read. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. I sat in the dark motel room, listening to the sound of a truck passing on the highway. I had come here because my father demanded it, because I felt a twisted sense of obligation to the man who gave me nothing but grief. But now the game had changed. Someone knew I was here. Someone knew I was dangerous. And someone knew that Gerald Peterson was not just a bully, but a liability. I looked at the laptop. I looked at the folder. I was not going to sleep tonight. I opened a new browser window and typed in a search query. Merriwick Civic Trust Board Minutes. It was time to see what my father had signed. I worked through the night. The motel room grew cold, but I did not turn up the heat. I liked the cold. It kept me sharp. I cross-referenced the names from the dinner against the public filings. Hank Reller, Reller Site Services, Reller Development Group. The man had a web of LLCs that all seemed to feed into one another. And there, on every document from the last 18 months, was my father's signature, Gerald Peterson. It was a flamboyant scrawl, big and loopy. He signed his name like he was signing the Declaration of Independence. He had no idea what he was doing. I could see it in the structure of the deals. He was signing off on vendor payments for construction projects that did not exist. He was approving loans to entities that had zero collateral. He was the useful idiot, the man who wanted to feel important so badly that he let them hand him the pen and point to the dotted line. I rubbed my eyes. The clock on the laptop read 4 a.m. I closed the computer and locked it back in the case. I slid the case under the bed. I lay down on the stiff mattress and stared at the ceiling. The water stain above the bed looked like a map of a country that didn't exist. My father called me worthless. He called me uneducated. He thought I was a child who needed to be scolded into submission. He was wrong. I was the only thing standing between him and prison. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I thought about the text message. Stay away from the trust. It was too late for that. I was already in. And I wasn't leaving until I found out who sent that message, and why they were so afraid of a woman who was supposed to be a failure. The sun began to rise over Merriwick, a gray, watery light that offered no warmth. I got up, showered, and put on my costume again, the cheap blouse, the sensible shoes, the expression of vague defeat. I looked in the mirror. Claire Peterson, the disappointment, stared back. "Showtime," I whispered. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. I had a breakfast date with my father's study. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to get the help he never asked for. I drove toward his house, the warning from the text message echoing in my mind. The town was waking up. The workers at the Keystone Vale factory were starting their shifts, oblivious to the fact that their retirement funds might be tied to the ink on my father's pen. I turned onto the street where I grew up. The house looked the same, large, imposing, and cold. I parked the car and walked up the driveway. I was walking into a trap. I knew that. But I also knew something else. I was the one who knew how to disarm it. I reached for the doorbell, took a breath, and rang it. The sound echoed inside, deep and hollow. I waited for the heavy footsteps of my father, preparing myself to be small, to be sorry, to be everything he expected me to be, because as long as he thought I was nothing, he would never see me coming. The door opened. Gerald stood there in his bathrobe, looking disheveled and annoyed. "What do you want?" he grumbled. "It is 7 in the morning. I forgot some paperwork." I lied smoothly. "For the job application. You said I needed to find a respectable path. I thought maybe I could use your printer." He stepped back, opening the door wide. "At least you are listening for once," he said. "Come in, but do not make a mess." I stepped over the threshold, into the belly of the beast. "I am just here to learn." "Dad," I said, and for the first time in years, I wasn't lying. I was here to learn everything. I walked past him into the hallway, my eyes already scanning the pile of mail on the console table. The game had begun. The smell of my father's house was the same as it had been 15 years ago, a mixture of lemon furniture polish, old paper, and the distinct, metallic scent of anxiety. I stood in the foyer, clutching a stack of blank printer paper I had brought from the motel, playing the part of the daughter who needed favors. Gerald was already in the kitchen, making a production of brewing coffee. He slammed cupboard doors and rattled spoons, a one-man symphony of irritation. "I do not know why you cannot print things at the library," he called out, his voice echoing off the hardwood floors. "It costs 10 cents a page. Surely you have 10 cents, Claire. Or has the economy been that hard on people with no marketable skills?" I walked into the kitchen. He was wearing a stiff dress shirt tucked into sweatpants, the uniform of a man who wanted to be ready for business from the waist up but had nowhere to go. "The library printer is down." "Dad," I lied, "I just need to print a few resume copies. I promise I will get out of your hair." He poured coffee into a mug that said, "World's Best Boss," a relic from a job he had been fired from in the late 90s. "Make it quick," he said. "I have important work to do. The trust is handling a major initiative with the manufacturing sector. Big things. Things you would not understand." I kept my face blank. A mask of dull obedience. "I am sure it is very complex," I said. He sneered, taking a sip of the scalding coffee. "It is. That is why men like Hank Reller and I are running it. We are the backbone. Claire, the backbone. You are just cartilage. Soft, useless, a drain on resources." He walked past me, bumping my shoulder intentionally. "I am going to change," he said. "Do not touch anything on my desk." As soon as I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs, I moved. I did not go to the printer in the den. I went straight to his study. The room was a monument to his ego. Framed photos of him shaking hands with local politicians covered the walls. But the desk told a different story. It was a chaotic sea of paper. Unopened bills were stacked next to glossy brochures for luxury cars he could not afford. I scanned the surface, my eyes trained to filter out the noise and find the signal. My training at Northbridge Risk Analytics had taught me that fraudsters were rarely tidy. They relied on volume to hide their sins. There, under a stack of Golf Digest magazines, I saw a thick blue binder. The spine was labeled Keystone Vale Manufacturing. Confidential. I pulled it out. My fingers moving light and fast, I opened it to a random page. It was a projected labor cost analysis, but the numbers were wrong. The overhead allocation was inflated by 300%. I flipped forward. There were invoices from Reller Site Services for consultation fees billed to Keystone Vale, but paid by the Marowak Civic Trust. Why was a charity paying the consultation fees for a private manufacturing company? I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. I quickly shut the binder and slid it back under the magazines. Next to the binder was a sealed envelope from Briar Ledge Community Bank. It was addressed to Gerald, but it was stamped Urgent, Account Overdraft. I took a picture of the envelope with my burner phone, careful to disable the flash. Gerald's voice boomed from the hallway. "Claire! What is taking so long?" I shoved the phone into my pocket and grabbed the stack of blank paper. "Just finished." "Dad!" I shouted back. I met him in the hallway. He was wearing suit trousers now, looking at me with suspicion. "You look guilty," he said. I am just anxious, I said, channeling the tremor into my voice, about the job hunt. He snorted. As you should be. Now go. I have a meeting with Hank. I walked out of the house, my heart rate steady at 60 beats per minute. He called me a drain. He called me soft. But I had seen the way his hand shook when he held that coffee mug. He was terrified. He was drowning, and he was pulling the whole town down with him to keep his head above water. 2 hours later, I sat in a booth at the Salty Spoon, a diner near the lakefront. Across from me sat Mila Serrano. Mila had been the only person in high school who didn't treat me like a contagious disease. Now, she was a loan officer at Briar Ledge Community Bank. She looked tired. Her dark curls were pulled back in a severe bun, and she kept glancing at the door. I cannot believe you are back. Claire, she said, stirring her iced tea. I heard you were in Ohio. People hear a lot of things. I said, I wanted to see you. Mila, it has been a long time. She looked at me, her eyes darting to my hands, then my face. You look different. Harder. Life happens, I said. She leaned in, lowering her voice. Listen, Claire, I am glad to see you, but I have to be careful. People are on edge. The bank is tense. I took a sip of my black coffee. Is this about the Civic Trust? Mila froze. Her spoon clattered against the glass. Who told you that? She whispered. Nobody, I said. But my father is the treasurer. He talks. He says he is a community liaison now. Mila let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. Liaison. Is that what he calls it? She looked around the diner, checking the nearby booths. They were empty. Claire, she said, her voice barely audible. Your father is coming into the branch 3 times a week. He is moving money around like he is playing a shell game. Transfers from the trust to general holding. Then out to external vendors within 24 hours. It gets flagged by the system, but the branch manager overrides it every time. Who is the manager? I asked. Paul Reller. She said, Hank's cousin. Of course. It was a closed loop. Mila reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers were cold. There are irregularities. Claire. Big ones. I tried to bring it up in the compliance meeting last week, and Paul told me I should focus on my own job if I wanted to keep it. I have 2 kids. I cannot lose this paycheck. You won't, I said, squeezing her hand. Just keep your head down. Do not sign anything you do not understand. It is not just the transfers, she said. It is the amounts. We are talking about 6 figures. Claire, money that is supposed to be for the park renovation and the library roof. It is all going out to these vague construction firms, and nothing is getting built. I nodded, filing the information away. The binder in Gerald's study made sense now. They were draining the trust to pay for something else. But what? Be careful, Mila said, pulling her hand back. If they think you are asking questions, they will not be nice. Hank Reller is not a good man. I know. I said, I remember. I left Mila and drove to the house my sister Dana shared with her fiancé. Elliot. It was a pristine, new construction colonial in the one part of Marowak that was still expanding. Dana was waiting for me on the porch. She looked like a magazine advertisement for suburban bliss. Cashmere sweater, pearl earrings, perfect makeup, but when she saw my rental car, her smile tightened. You are late, she said as I walked up the steps. I did not know we had a schedule. I said, we always have a schedule. Claire, that is how successful people operate. She led me into the living room, which was decorated in shades of beige and cream. It was beautiful and completely soulless. I wanted to talk to you, she said, gesturing for me to sit on a white sofa that looked like it had never been sat on. About Dad? Is he okay? I asked, feigning ignorance. No, he is not, Dana said sharply. She paced in front of the fireplace. He is a mess. Claire, he has been leveraging his own assets to keep up appearances. He owes money. To whom? She waved a hand dismissively. To banks? To credit cards? It does not matter. The point is, Elliot and I are handling it. She stopped pacing and looked at me. her expression a mix of arrogance and martyrdom. "Elliot's family has resources," she said. "The Crane family is very established, part of our engagement agreement. Well, it is understood that they will help stabilize Dad's situation. They are going to refinance his debts and put some capital into his projects." I felt a cold chill in my stomach. Dana was selling herself. She was marrying Elliot not just for love, if there was love, but as a bailout package for Gerald. "Dana," I said softly, "you do not have to do that." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Of course I do. Someone has to be the adult. Someone has to save this family. It certainly is not going to be you." She walked over to the window and looked out at the manicured lawn. "You should be grateful." "Claire," she said, her back to me, "I am saving him so you do not have to. You can go back to whatever invisible little life you live and pretend none of this exists. I am the one who stays. I am the one who fixes things." She turned back, her eyes wet with angry tears. "Just tell him I am doing a good job," she said. "Can you do that? Can you just tell him that Dana is taking care of it?" I looked at her. Beneath the cashmere and the cruelty, she was just a little girl trying to buy her father's love with a dowry she couldn't afford. "He knows." "Dana," I said. She wiped her eyes quickly. "I do not need your pity. Claire, I need you to stay out of the way. Elliot's father is looking at the Keystone Vale assets. If this deal goes through, everything will be fine. Just do not mess it up." The community meeting was held that evening in the gymnasium of Merriwick High School. The air smelled of floor wax and old sweat. Bleachers were pulled out, filled with men and women in work boots and denim jackets. These were the workers from Keystone Vale Manufacturing, the people whose livelihoods hung by a thread. I sat in the back row, huddled in my coat. On the stage, a folding table had been set up. My father sat in the center. Flanked by Hank Reller and a man I recognized as the mayor, Gerald leaned into the microphone. It squealed, sending a wince through the crowd. "Citizens of Merriwick," Gerald boomed, his voice projecting that false confidence I knew so well. "I know there are rumors. I know there is fear. But let me assure you, the Civic Trust and the Town Council are working day and night to secure the future of Keystone Vale." A man in the front row stood up. He was holding a baseball cap in his hands, twisting it. "Mr. Peterson," he said, "we haven't had overtime in 3 months. There are rumors the pension fund is being frozen. Can you look us in the eye and tell us our pensions are safe?" Gerald smiled. It was a politician's smile. "All teeth and no eyes, Bob. I can tell you that we are exploring innovative financial structures to protect all assets. The trust has stepped in to provide a bridge. We are a community. We help each other." It was a non-answer, a deflection. Hank Reller leaned over and whispered something to Gerald, then grabbed the mic. "What Gerald means," Hank said, his voice grating and aggressive, "is that you people need to be patient. Business is complicated. You want the factory to stay open? Then let us do our jobs." The crowd murmured. They were angry, but they were also scared. They didn't want to push too hard and be the first ones fired. I raised my hand. I did not stand up. I kept my voice small, confused. "Excuse me?" I said. Heads turned. Gerald squinted into the dark gym. "Claire?" he said. "What are you doing?" "I just have a question," I said, looking at a notebook I had pulled from my bag. I was looking at the public filing for the scholarship fund. "The one the trust manages?" Hank's eyes narrowed. He recognized the threat instantly. "This meeting is about the factory, not scholarships." Hank snapped. "Right," I said, sounding apologetic, "but I am confused. The filing says the scholarship fund has $400,000 in it, but the bank record for the trust shows that money was moved to an escrow account for industrial development." The room went silent. I continued, playing the part of the dim-witted daughter. "Does that mean the factory is using the scholarship money? I am just trying to understand the math. If the money is in escrow, how do the kids get their tuition paid next month?" Gerald looked panic-stricken. He looked at Hank. Hank stood up, his face reddening. "That is an accounting technicality," he shouted. his voice echoing off the gym walls. "It is a temporary liquidity allocation. It is standard practice." He pointed a finger at me. "We do not have time for uninformed questions from people who do not understand high finance. Sit down." "Claire." I sat back, shrinking into my coat, to the room. I looked like I had been scolded, but I had done exactly what I intended. I looked around. The workers were whispering. The man named Bob was looking at Gerald with new suspicion. I had planted the seed. Standard practice or not, they now knew their kid's college money was being gambled on the factory floor. Gerald was glaring at me with pure hatred. He would punish me for this later. But for now, the seed was growing. The next morning, Ruth Mallory texted me an address. It was not a coffee shop. It was her home, a small bungalow near the edge of the woods. I arrived at 10 o'clock. Ruth was gardening, wearing heavy gloves and a sun hat. She waved me inside without a word. Her kitchen was cluttered but cozy. She poured me a cup of herbal tea and sat down opposite me. "You stirred up a hornet's nest last night," she said. "I just asked a question." I said. Ruth smiled grimly. "You asked the right question. That is what worries me. You are not as simple as your father pretends. Are you, Claire?" I looked at her. Ruth was sharp. She had been an educator for 40 years. She knew when a student was faking. "I pay attention," I said. Ruth sighed and placed a folder on the table. "I am retiring from the board next month," she said. "I am tired. Claire, I am tired of the secrets." She opened the folder. "The scholarship fund is gone," she said flatly. I froze. "Gone?" "Repurposed," she corrected. Hank Reller convinced the board that the only way to save Keystone Vale, and the town, was to use the trust's liquid assets as a guarantee for a private loan. A loan to Reller's development group, which is buying the factory debt. "It is a circle," I said. "It is a noose," Ruth said. "But here's the part they did not tell the public." She slid a document toward me. It was a loan agreement, heavy with legalese. She pointed to a paragraph on the 3rd page. I read it. My blood ran cold. "In the event of default by the borrower, Keystone Vale/Reller Group, the guarantor, Merriwick Civic Trust, agrees to pledge all real and liquid assets as collateral, including but not limited to municipal holdings, land deeds, and pension maintenance funds." I looked up at Ruth. "If the factory goes under," I said, my voice steady but quiet, "the bank takes everything, the library, the park, the scholarships, the town's emergency fund." Ruth nodded. "And the factory is failing. Claire, the orders are not coming in. Hank is betting everything on a government contract that hasn't been signed yet. If that contract falls through, Merriwick becomes a ghost town." I finished. "And your father signed it," Ruth said. "He signed it all." I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. Gerald Peterson. It was bold and confident, the signature of a man who thought he was saving the world. "He does not know about the collateral clause," I said. "He would not destroy the town intentionally." Ruth looked at me sadly. "He didn't read it, Claire. He just wanted to be the one holding the pen." I stood up, the tea turning sour in my stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you are the only one he might listen to," she said, "even if he hates you for it, and because I think you are the only one who actually understands what is happening." I walked out of Ruth's house with the weight of the town on my shoulders. I sat in my car for a long time. The impulse to run was overwhelming. I could go back to the motel, pack my secure case, and drive until I hit the interstate. I could be Sarah Bennett again by dinner time. I could be safe, if I stayed. I risked everything. My anonymity, my career, my freedom. If this blew up and my real name was attached to it, the old scandal would resurface. They would say Claire Peterson was involved in another fraud. They would finish the job they started 6 years ago. But then I thought about Mila Serrano and her 2 kids. I thought about the man named Bob twisting his baseball cap. I thought about the library where I used to hide when my father was yelling. If I left, the bank would foreclose on an entire community. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I could not leave. I started the car and drove back toward the center of town. I needed to think. I needed a strategy. I parked near the cafe where I had met Mila and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The wind was picking up, blowing dust and dead leaves down the street. A black pickup truck pulled up to the curb, blocking my path. The window rolled down. It was Hank Reller. He was wearing sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. He smiled, but it was a predator's baring of teeth. "Taking a walk." "Claire?" he asked. "Just getting some air." "Hank," I said. He leaned an arm out the window. "You ask a lot of questions for a girl who is supposed to be dumb." "I'm just trying to learn," I said. Hank laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You know, I looked you up," he said. "Not much there. Just a few failed classes and a lot of empty years. But you do not talk like a dropout. You talk like a lawyer." I felt a spike of adrenaline. He was fishing. He didn't know, but he suspected. "I watch a lot of TV." I said. Hank stopped smiling. "Listen to me. Claire, this is a small town. Accidents happen. People get confused. People get hurt when they stick their noses where they don't belong." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "I am giving you advice," he said. "Go back to Ohio. Go back to wherever you came from. Because you are not as invisible as you think. Claire." He rolled up the window and drove away. The tires screeching slightly on the asphalt, I stood on the sidewalk, watching the truck disappear around the corner. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. He thought I was invisible. He thought I was nothing. He was about to find out just how visible I could be. The blue light of my laptop screen was the only illumination in the motel room. It was 2 a.m, and the silence of Merriwick was heavy, broken only by the occasional hum of the ice machine down the hall. I was deep in the digital architecture of the Merriwick Civic Trust's vendor list when a red dialog box flashed in the corner of my screen. It was a direct ping from Julian, my division head at Northbridge Risk Analytics. "Network anomaly detected. Location signature does not match profile home base. Please confirm status." My heart hammered against my ribs. I had been careful. I was routing my connection through a proxy server in Boston, bouncing the signal to look like I was sitting in my secure apartment 300 miles away. But the local ISP in Merriwick was old and unstable. The connection must have dropped for a millisecond, leaking my true IP address. If Northbridge found out I was in Pennsylvania, specifically in a town connected to the Claire Peterson scandal from 6 years ago, my clearance would be pulled before sunrise, to them. I was Sarah Bennett, a woman with no history prior to 2018. I typed rapidly, my fingers cold, visiting a sick relative in rural PA. "Secure tunnel is active. Will rectify signal stability." The cursor blinked. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. "Copy that. Keep the tunnel tight. We have a compliance audit next week." I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for an hour. It was close, too close. My 2 lives were beginning to bleed into each other, and that was when mistakes happened. That was when people got caught. I closed the laptop and locked it in the case. I needed to move faster. I could not run this investigation from a distance anymore. I needed to be inside the house. The next morning, I arrived at my father's house with a box of donuts and a look of practiced defeat. Gerald was at the kitchen table, surrounded by a blizzard of paper. He looked haggard. His skin was gray, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of expensive moisturizer could hide. He looked up as I entered, his eyes narrowing. "Carbohydrates," he said, eyeing the box. "Is that your solution to everything? Comfort food?" "I thought you might be hungry," I said, setting the box down, "and I wanted to help." "Help?" He laughed, a dry barking sound. "You cannot even help yourself." "Claire, how are you going to help me? I saw your desk yesterday," I said, keeping my voice soft and submissive. "It looks overwhelmed. I know I'm not good at big business things, but I can organize, I can file, I can help you with basic budgeting if you want. It is the least I can do while I'm staying in town. Gerald picked up a glazed donut, inspecting it like it might be poisoned. He took a bite, chewing slowly. I suppose I could use a clerk, he mumbled. Someone to sort the invoices. Just do not read anything. You would not understand the complexities of these deals anyway. I will just sort them by date. I promised. He waved a hand at the study. Go ahead. But if you mess up my system, you are out. I walked into the study and closed the door, leaving it open just a crack so I could hear him if he approached. His system was a disaster. It was the frantic hoarding of a man trying to cover his tracks. I started sorting, but my eyes were scanning for patterns. I found a stack of invoices from Reller Site Services. They were printed on cheap paper, the kind you buy at an office supply store in bulk. I pulled one out. Invoice number 402, Consultation for Community Improvement Project. Amount, $12,000. I pulled out another. Invoice number 403, Logistics Coordination. Amount, $8,500. There were dozens of them. The dates corresponded perfectly with the withdrawals I had seen from the scholarship fund, every time money left the trust for education allocation. A bill from Reller appeared within 48 hours to soak it up. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos, my hands moving with the precision of a surgeon. What are you doing? I spun around. Gerald was standing in the doorway, his face twisted in a snarl. He had moved quietly for a big man. I dropped the paper, letting my hands tremble. The date was smudged. I stammered. I was trying to read it. He crossed the room in 2 strides and snatched the invoice from the desk. You are snooping, he accused. His voice was rising, vibrating with a mix of anger and fear. You cannot stand it, can you? You cannot stand that I am doing important work with important people. You are jealous. Jealous? I asked, making myself shrink back. Jealous of educated people, he shouted. You look at these papers and you see your own failure. You see what you could have been if you hadn't been so lazy, so stupid. He crumpled the invoice in his fist. Get out, he hissed. Get out of my office before I throw you out. I nodded, eyes wide, and scurried past him. I played the terrified daughter perfectly. But as I walked to my car, I felt a cold satisfaction. He was unraveling, and he hadn't noticed that while he was yelling at me, I had pocketed the carbon copy of the ledger summary. I needed to clear my head. I drove to the park near the lake, the one the trust was supposed to be maintaining. The grass was overgrown, and the swing set was rusted. This was where the money was supposed to go. I sat on a bench, watching the gray water lap against the shore. Mind if I sit? I looked up. It was Elliot Crane, Dana's fiancé. He was wearing a cashmere coat and a scarf that probably cost more than my rental car. He didn't wait for an answer. He sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between us. You are hard to find. Claire, he said, I am not hiding. I said, aren't you? He looked at me. His eyes were different from the others in this town. They were sharp, analytical. He didn't look at me with pity or disdain. He looked at me like I was a puzzle he hadn't solved yet. Dana says you are just drifting. He said that you are lost. Dana worries about me, I said automatically. Elliot smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Dana worries about how things look. That is different, but you do not hold yourself like someone who is lost. He turned his body toward me. I have sat across the table from a lot of people. Claire, desperate people, broken people. You do not have the posture of a failure. You have the posture of someone waiting for an opening. I felt a spike of alarm. Elliot was smarter than I had anticipated. He was a variable I hadn't accounted for. I do not know what you mean, I said. He looked out at the lake. My father is considering buying the debt on Keystone Vale, he said quietly. It is a risky buy. The financials are opaque, but the Rellers are pushing hard. They say the Civic Trust is backing the whole thing. He paused. If I were an investor, he continued, I would want to know why the Trust's treasurer, your father, looks like a man who hasn't slept in a month. I would want to know why his daughter, who is supposedly uneducated, is the only one asking questions about the math. I stayed silent. I could not give him anything. Not yet. He stood up, brushing lint from his coat. I am not your enemy. Claire, I love your sister. God help me. I do not want to see her family destroyed. But I think Gerald is in trouble. Real trouble. Not just debt. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He placed it on the bench between us. If you decide to stop pretending, call me. I think you know more than you are saying. And I think you are the only one who can stop this train before it goes off the cliff. He walked away, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I stared at the card. Elliot Crane, Crane Capital Management. He knew. He didn't know the specifics, but he knew the persona was a lie. I picked up the card and slipped it into my pocket. I had an ally. Maybe. Or maybe I had another threat. That afternoon, I met Mila Serrano in the back of her car, parked behind an abandoned strip mall. It was the only place she felt safe. She was shaking. I printed the transaction history, she said, handing me a thick envelope. If Paul finds out I did this, I will be fired. I will be blacklisted. You are saving the bank. Mila, I said, taking the envelope. If this goes south, the feds will come in. If you have a record of trying to report it. You are a whistleblower, not an accomplice. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. Is it that bad? I opened the envelope. The paper trail was clearer now. Money went from the trust account into the Briar Ledge General Fund. Then, almost instantly, it was wired to Reller Site Services. But here was the new piece. Reller Site Services was immediately transferring the funds to a holding company called MRP Holdings, Marowak Redevelopment Partners. I said. Mila nodded. I looked them up. It is a shell. No employees, no office, just a registered agent in Delaware. But guess who the signatories are? I looked at the document she pointed to. Hank Reller, Paul Reller, and a third name, scribbled in a handwriting I knew better than my own. Gerald Peterson. They are washing the money. I said. They are taking the charitable funds, moving them through the bank to make them look like loans, and then funneling them into a private development company they all own. And the factory? Mila asked. The factory is just the bait. I said. They are using the factory's distress to justify the emergency transfers. They claim they are saving jobs, but they are just looting the vault. I looked at the total amount transferred in the last 6 months, $450,000. It was gone. The scholarship fund, the library repair fund, the emergency winter heating assistance fund, all of it, sitting in a shell account in Delaware. I have to go. Mila said, I have to get back before lunch is over. She opened the door, then paused. Claire, she said, be careful. Hank came into the bank today. He asked Paul if there was any way to trace who was accessing the trust accounts. Paul told him he would check the logs. I nodded. Burn the logs if you can. Mila, or corrupt the file. I cannot, she said. It is backed up off-site. She got out and ran toward her car. I sat there, clutching the envelope. The net was tightening. They were looking for leaks, and I was the biggest leak in town. I needed to confirm the connection between Reller Site Services and MRP Holdings. I needed public filings. That meant a trip to the county courthouse. The courthouse was a grand old building made of sandstone, smelling of floor wax and bureaucracy. I wore a scarf over my head and dark glasses, trying to look like just another grieving widow or divorced wife looking for paperwork. I went to the clerk's office and requested the archived business filings for Reller Site Services. The clerk, a bored teenager chewing gum, handed me a heavy file. I took it to a table in the corner and started photographing the pages. The articles of incorporation listed the business address as a P.O. box. The listed assets were consulting intellectual property. It was a joke. It was a fake company designed to invoice for air. Claire? The voice came from behind me. I froze. I knew that voice. It was the voice that had narrated my downfall 6 years ago. I turned slowly. Standing there was Dale Orwin, the reporter for the Marowak Gazette. He was older, balder, but he still had that hungry look of a man desperate for a headline. Dale, I said, keeping my voice flat. I heard you were back, he said, stepping closer. I didn't believe it. The prodigal daughter returns. He looked at the file open on the table. Reller Site Services. He read, "Interesting reading material for a family reunion. I'm just helping my father organize some receipts." I said, Dale laughed. "Come on, Claire. I remember you. I remember the story. The academic fraud. The plagiarism scandal. You left town with your tail between your legs. Now you are back, and you are looking at the contractor's files?" He leaned in, his breath smelling of onions. "Is there a story here? Claire, is the old leopard trying to change its spots? Or are you looking for a way to cash in?" My heart began to race. Not the steady, adrenaline-fueled focus of the investigation, but the erratic, terrifying rhythm of panic. The room seemed to tilt. My throat closed up. This was the nightmare. If Dale wrote a story about me, scandal-plagued daughter returns to Marowak, it would get picked up by the aggregators. The algorithms at Northbridge would see it. My boss would see it. They would connect Sarah Bennett to Claire Peterson. I have to go," I stammered. I shoved the file back at the clerk and grabbed my bag. "Run away." "Claire," Dale called after me. "It is what you are best at." I burst out of the courthouse doors and into the cold air. I couldn't breathe. I leaned against the brick wall, gasping. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't get my keys out of my pocket. "Calm down," I told myself. "Breathe. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out." I forced myself to inhale. The panic attack was a physical reaction, a biological glitch. I was not that scared little girl anymore. I was a professional. I was a weapon. I straightened my coat. I put my sunglasses back on. I walked to my car with steady steps. Even though my insides were screaming, I could not let Dale Orwin stop me. I had to finish this. That night, the house was dark when I let myself in. I had come to drop off the organized invoices, a peace offering to keep my access open. I found Gerald in the living room. He was sitting in the dark, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The TV was on, muted, casting flickering shadows across his face. "Dad?" I said softly. He didn't look up. "They are going to lay people off," he said. His voice was thick, slurred. "Keystone. They are cutting 50 jobs next week." I stood in the doorway. I saw the draft schedule for layoffs. I said. He chuckled. A dark, miserable sound. I told them I would save them. I stood on that stage and I promised. He took a long drink. "Do you know why I hate you, Claire?" he asked. The question hung in the air, brutal and honest. "Because I am a failure," I said. "No," he said. He turned to look at me, his eyes wet and unfocused. "Because you are me." I stepped closer, drawn by the gravity of the confession. Dana. "Dana is what I wanted to be," he said. "Shiny, successful, educated. She has that piece of paper on the wall. The MBA. The proof that she matters." He pointed a shaking finger at his own chest. I never finished. "Claire." "What?" I whispered. "College," he said. "I dropped out junior year. I failed statistics. I failed economics. But I told everyone I graduated. I told your mother. I told the town. I built this whole life on a lie. I am the treasurer of the trust, and I do not even have a degree." He looked at me with a mixture of loathing and recognition. "And then you came along. You flunked out. You got into trouble. You are just like me. Weak, a fraud. Every time I look at you, I see the truth I'm trying to hide." He threw the glass into the fireplace. It shattered, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Go to bed, Claire. I am sick of looking at you." I walked out of the room, my heart aching. Not for myself. I knew who I was. I ached for the tragedy of him. He had destroyed our relationship, destroyed my self-esteem, and was now destroying the town, all to protect a secret that didn't matter. He was a man hollowed out by his own imposter syndrome. But pity wouldn't save the scholarship fund. I went upstairs to the guest room where I had been crashing occasionally to keep up appearances. I needed to check the documents I had pilfered from his desk earlier. I spread them out on the bed, invoices, bank statements, and a draft agreement I hadn't looked at closely yet. It was stapled to the back of the Reller Site Services contract. Consulting Agreement Addendum. I scanned the legalese. It was a standard liability waiver, assigning responsibility for the financial structuring of the rescue package. And there, at the bottom, was the line that stopped my heart. Authorized and consenting advisor. Name: Claire Peterson. Signature. My name was typed out, and next to it, someone had already penciled in a signature. It was a clumsy forgery, a jagged attempt to mimic the way I signed my name in high school. I stared at it, the blood draining from my face. This wasn't just about money. This was an exit strategy. Hank and Gerald knew the scheme was going to collapse. They knew the money was gone and the factory wasn't going to be saved. They needed a scapegoat. Who better than the uneducated, drifting daughter who had suddenly returned to town? The daughter with a history of fraud? They were going to pin it on me. They were going to say I advised them, that I set up the shell companies, that I confused my poor elderly father and his trusting friends. I was the patsy. Again, I picked up the paper, my hand shaking with a new kind of fury. My father had just confessed his vulnerability to me downstairs. He had cried about his own failures, and all the while, he had this document sitting on his desk, ready to send me to prison to save his own skin. I looked at the forged signature. They wanted a villain? Fine. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the business card Elliot had given me. It rang twice. "This is Crane," a voice answered. "Elliot," I said. "It is Claire. We need to talk. Tonight." I stared at the document on the bedspread, the cheap polyester quilt scratching against my knuckles. The signature was a forgery, and a bad one at that. But legally it was a guillotine blade hanging over my neck. Claire Peterson, consenting advisor. The architecture of the trap was breathtakingly simple. When the Merriwick Civic Trust inevitably collapsed, when the money ran out and the factory closed and the bank foreclosed on the town's assets, someone had to be blamed. Gerald Peterson, the bumbling treasurer who just wanted to be important, was too pathetic to be a mastermind. Hank Reller, the shark, was too slippery to leave his fingerprints on the murder weapon. But Claire Peterson, the drifting, uneducated daughter who returned to town just weeks before the implosion, the woman with a shadowy past and a reputation for failure, I was the perfect villain. I was the narrative they needed. They would say I came back, manipulated my elderly father, set up these shell accounts, and then tried to vanish. I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. This was not just fraud. This was a setup designed to send me to federal prison. I needed legal counsel, but I could not walk into a local firm. The Merriwick legal community was a country club, and half the lawyers probably played golf with Hank. I opened my laptop and engaged the VPN. I pulled up the contact information for Sasha Klein, an attorney in Chicago I had used once for a consultation on digital identity rights. I dialed her office line through an encrypted VoIP app. She answered on the second ring. "Klein, Sasha." "It is Sarah Bennett," I said. Using my professional alias, "I need a hypothetical consultation. Right now." "Go ahead." "Sarah," she said, her voice shifting to professional alertness. "Hypothetically, if a person discovers their signature has been forged on a liability waiver for a distressed financial entity, and that entity is engaged in what looks like money laundering, what is the exposure for the victim?" "Total exposure," Sasha said instantly. "If the entity goes under and the regulators step in, the burden of proof shifts. If your name is on the document as an advisor, you are a co-conspirator until proven otherwise. You are looking at civil liability for the losses and criminal liability for the fraud." "What if the victim stays quiet?" I asked. "What if they just destroy the copy they found?" "Silence is ratification," she said. "If you know about the forgery and you do not contest it immediately, a prosecutor can argue that you accepted the role. You need to go on the record. Sarah, you need to file a police report or an affidavit of forgery. Today, I cannot go to the police." I said, "Not yet. Then you need to get the original document," Sasha said, "or you need to get the person who forged it to admit it on tape. Otherwise, You are already wearing handcuffs. You just cannot feel them yet." I hung up. The room felt very small. I could not go to the police because filing a report meant handing over my ID. It meant fingerprints. It meant the system would run Claire Peterson against Sarah Bennett, and my entire life would disintegrate. I had to handle this inside the house. I found Gerald in the kitchen. He was eating toast with a grim determination, crumbs falling onto his sweater. The morning light was gray and unforgiving, highlighting the broken veins in his nose. I placed the document on the table in front of him. I didn't say anything. I just pointed to the bottom of the page. He looked at it, chewed for a moment, and then took a sip of coffee. "What is this?" he asked. "It is a consulting agreement." "Dad," I said, keeping my voice level, "it says I advised you to transfer the scholarship funds to Reller Site Services, and it has my signature on it." He waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, that is just paperwork. Hank's lawyer said we needed to show that we had outside counsel. Since you were helping me organize the office, we thought it made sense. You forged my signature." I said, "I did not forge anything." He snapped, "I signed it on your behalf. Parents sign things for their children all the time. I am 32 years old." I said, "And this is not a permission slip for a field trip. This is a legal document making me liable for $400,000 of missing money." Gerald stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the tile. "Missing money? Now you are sounding paranoid again. The money is not missing. It is invested. And how dare you come in here and accuse me of a crime? I am trying to save this town." I looked at his hands. They were gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He was shaking, a fine, rhythmic tremor that traveled up his arms. He knew, deep down, in the part of his brain that wasn't diluted by narcissism, he knew exactly what this was. "Did you sign this, Dad?" I asked. "Or did Hank?" "It does not matter," he shouted. "You are making trouble. Claire, you are always making trouble. You should be grateful we included you. It gives you a resume. It makes you look like you actually did something with your life instead of whatever it is you do." He was breathing hard. His face flushed. "If you are so innocent," I said, "then you won't mind if I take this to a lawyer." Panic flared in his eyes. It was raw and immediate. "You will do no such thing," he hissed. "You want to ruin the deal? You want the factory to close? If you show that to anyone, the bank pulls the funding. Is that what you want? To be the reason 200 people lose their jobs?" He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You are worthless. Claire, do not make yourself dangerous too." I picked up the paper and folded it. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I saw him now. He wasn't a monster. He was a coward who had been cornered by a predator, and he was willing to throw his own child to the wolves to buy himself another day of pretending he was a king. "I will handle it." "Dad," I said softly. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving him standing there, shaking in his socks. I needed confirmation of the mechanics. I drove to Ruth Mallory's house. She was packing boxes. Her retirement was imminent, and she looked like she was fleeing a crime scene. "Ruth," I said, standing in her hallway, "who handled the signing of the transfer documents?" She taped a box shut with a rip of brown plastic. It was a chaos. "Claire," she said, not looking at me. "Hank called an emergency meeting. He said the bank needed the papers by 5 o'clock or the deal was off. He had stacks of them, hundreds of pages. And the witnesses?" I asked. "Your father," she said. She looked up, her eyes sad. Gerald insisted. He said, "I will handle the administration." He sat at the head of the table with a stamp and a pen. He was witnessing signatures on pages he hadn't even read. He was so proud of himself. He kept saying, "Leave it to me. I am the detail man." "And did you see him sign my name?" Ruth froze. She looked at the door, then back at me. "I saw him with a stack of writer addendums," she whispered. "He was signing them one after another." I asked him what they were, and he said, "Just advisor consents, formalities." I didn't look closely. "Claire, I just wanted to get out of there." I nodded. It fit. Gerald thought he was being efficient. Hank had probably handed him the stack and said, "Just get these done, Gerald." And Gerald, desperate to please, had signed my life away. Thank you. Ruth, I said. She grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. Run, she said. Just get in your car and leave. Claire, you cannot fix this. I cannot leave. I said, if I leave, they win. I drove to Dana's house next. I needed to see if my sister was part of the conspiracy or just another casualty. She was in the living room, looking at wedding flower arrangements on an iPad. When I told her about the signature, I expected horror. I expected her to be outraged on my behalf. Instead, she set the iPad down and sighed, as if I had told her I had spilled red wine on a rug. Honestly, Claire, she said, are you sure you didn't sign it and forget? I stared at her. Forget signing a liability waiver for a $500,000 fund? You have a history, she said, crossing her arms. You are not exactly reliable. Maybe Dad asked you to help and you just did it. And now that you realize it is risky, you are trying to back out. Dana, I said, my voice rising. He forged my name. That is a felony. Oh, stop using legal words, she snapped. You sound ridiculous. Dad is not a felon. He is a little disorganized. Yes, but he loves us. He would not hurt you. She stood up and walked to the window, her back rigid. This is just like you, she said. You come back here and suddenly everything is a drama. You have to be the victim. Poor Claire, the uneducated one. Look how mean everyone is to her. She turned to face me, and her face was twisted with a strange, defensive anger. Did it ever occur to you that maybe he put your name on it to help you? To give you a credit? To make you feel included in the family business? By framing me for fraud? I asked. By giving you a purpose, she shouted. God, you are so ungrateful. Elliot is trying to save the factory. Dad is trying to save the trust. I am trying to plan a wedding, and you are running around with conspiracy theories because you are jealous that you are not the one saving the day. This stuff follows you. Claire, she said, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. Trouble. It follows you. Maybe that is why you had to change your name and leave town the first time. I went still. What did you say? I asked. Dana looked away, flushing slightly. I know you think nobody knows, she said, but people talk about why you left college, about the cheating. I didn't cheat. I said, whatever. She said, it doesn't matter. Just stop trying to make Dad the bad guy. He is the only father we have. I looked at my sister. She was terrified. She had tied her entire future, her marriage, her status, her home, to the idea that the Peterson family was respectable. If she admitted that Gerald was a criminal, her reality would shatter. So she had to believe I was the liar. It was a survival mechanism. I walked out of her house without another word. There was no point in arguing with someone who needed the lie to breathe. I went back to the motel and worked. If I was going to survive this, I needed leverage. I needed a weapon so undeniable that even Dana and Gerald couldn't ignore it. I opened the hard case and set up my workspace. I pinned the photos of the invoices to a digital whiteboard on my laptop. I created a timeline. March 3rd. Trust account balance, $450,000. March 5th. Gerald Peterson signs check number 409 to Briar Ledge General Fund. March 6th. Briar Ledge transfers funds to Reller Site Services. March 7th. Reller Site Services invoices. Trust for consultation. March 8th. Funds move to MRP Holdings, Delaware. I cross-referenced the signatures. I found a public notary log online for the county. On the dates the documents were notarized, the notary listed was Brenda Reller, Hank's sister-in-law. It was incestuous, it was sloppy, and it was all there in black and white. I built a dossier. I color-coded the flow of money. I highlighted the contradictions in the meeting minutes versus the bank timestamps. I created a visual map of the theft. It took me 6 hours. By the time I was done, I had a document that could send 5 people to prison, but I still needed to deliver it without exposing Sarah Bennett. I needed groceries. I drove to the local supermarket, my head still buzzing with numbers. I was in the produce aisle, squeezing avocados, when a cart blocked my path. It was Dale Orwin. He wasn't smiling this time. He looked eager, like a dog that had caught a scent. "Claire," he said, "just the woman I wanted to see." I tried to step around him. "I am busy." "Dale, I made some calls," he said, matching my pace. "To your old university. To the registrar." I stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs. "They were very interesting." He said, "They confirmed that a Claire Peterson was expelled for academic dishonesty. But here is the weird part. When I tried to find any record of you after that, nothing. No tax returns. No address. It is like you fell off the face of the earth for 6 years." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "And now you are back. And money is missing from the trust. And your dad is sweating bullets. What do you want?" "Dale?" I asked. "I want the story," he said. "The real story. I think you came back to scam the old man. I think you are the one moving the money. The black sheep returns to shear the flock." "That is a lie," I said. "Is it?" he asked. "Then give me something else. Tell me what is really happening, or I run the story on Monday. The grifter daughter. I have the draft written. Claire, it is a good read." I stared at him. He didn't know the truth. He was guessing. But his guess could destroy me. If he published a story accusing me of fraud, Northbridge's automated media scrubbers would flag it. My boss would see it. They would look into Claire Peterson. They would find the connection. "I have no comment," I said, forcing myself to walk away. "Monday." "Claire," he called after me. "You have until Monday." I sat in my car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel. I was trapped. If I exposed Gerald and Hank, I risked exposing myself. If I stayed silent, Dale would expose me anyway. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the boat launch. 10 minutes. Elliot." I hesitated. Was this another trap? But I remembered his eyes at the park. He was the only one who had looked at me with respect. I drove to the boat launch. It was deserted, the water black and oily under the moonlight. Elliot's Audi was parked near the ramp. He was leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette. "I didn't know you smoked," I said, getting out of my car. "I don't," he said, dropping it and crushing it under his heel. "Only when I'm looking at a balance sheet that makes no sense." He looked at me. "My father's firm finished the preliminary due diligence on Keystone Vale today." He said, "We found the Reller connection. We found the invoices. So you know." I said, "I know Hank is a crook." He said, "And I know your father is a fool. But I also saw a document in the data room, a consulting agreement with your signature on it. I felt the air leave my lungs. It is a forgery." I said, "I know," Elliot said. I looked at him, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because I had our handwriting analyst look at it." He said, "It matches your father's pen pressure and stroke order." He signed it. "Claire, he sold you out." I felt a sudden, stinging rush of tears. Hearing it from a stranger, or near stranger, made it real in a way that my own deductions hadn't. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because my family is about to buy this mess," he said, "and I do not want to buy a lawsuit. If we acquire Keystone, we acquire the liability. If this fraud comes out after we sign, we are on the hook." He reached into his car and pulled out a manila envelope. "I can't go to the police," he said, "not without blowing up the deal and humiliating Dana. But you can." He handed me the envelope. "This is the internal audit report from my firm. It proves the forgery. It proves the money laundering. It is everything you need to clear your name." "Why not just turn it in yourself?" I asked. "Because I need to be the one who saves the factory," he said, a hint of steel in his voice. "That is my job. Your job is to save yourself." He paused. "There is a state oversight office in Harrisburg, the Financial Integrity Bureau. They have a whistleblower drop box. If this packet shows up there, they will freeze the trust's assets within 24 hours. "And my father?" I asked. "He goes down," Elliot said. "There is no way around that. But if you do this, you control the narrative. You become the whistleblower, not the accomplice." He got back into his car. "One chance." "Claire," he said, Do it before the board meeting on Tuesday, or Hank wins. I watched him drive away. I held the envelope against my chest. It was the weapon I needed. But pulling the trigger meant destroying my father. The next day was Sunday, the weekly family lunch. It was a Peterson tradition that Gerald refused to cancel, even when the world was burning. We sat at the long mahogany dining table, Gerald at the head, Dana and Elliot on one side, me on the other. The tension was so thick it felt like humidity. Gerald was manic, talking too loudly about the weather, about the neighbors, about anything except the elephant in the room. Dana was picking at her salad, refusing to look at me. Elliot was eating calmly, his face unreadable. "So, Claire," Gerald said, slicing his roast beef with aggressive force, "have you found a job yet? Or are you still researching?" He said the word researching with a sneer, mocking my earlier offer to help with the budget. "I am looking, Dad." I said, "You know, Hank was telling me his nephew is hiring laborers for the construction crew." Gerald said, "It is honest work. Might be good for you. Get your hands dirty. Learn what it means to actually earn $1. Dana giggled nervously. "Dad, stop." "No, I am serious," Gerald said, his voice booming. "She thinks she is too good for us. She walks around with that little notebook, acting like she is investigating a crime. It is insulting." He pointed his knife at me. "You have never built anything, Claire. You have never finished anything. You are uneducated. You are worthless. And the fact that you think you can judge me? It is a joke." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had forged my name to save his own ego. I looked at the man who was terrified of being exposed as a dropout. So he projected all his shame onto me. I gripped the napkin in my lap. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the audit report on the table and watch his face crumble. I wanted to tell him that I made more money in a month than he had made in the last 10 years, but I didn't. Silence was power. If I spoke now, I would give him the reaction he wanted. I would be the hysterical daughter. I took a sip of water. My hand was steady. "Is that all?" "Dad?" I asked quietly. He blinked, surprised by my lack of reaction. He deflated slightly, his bullying momentum robbed by my calm. "Just pass the potatoes," he muttered. I passed the bowl. I caught Elliot's eye. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I had passed the test. I hadn't broken. I drove back to the motel with the envelope on the passenger seat. I was ready. I was going to Harrisburg tomorrow. I was going to burn it all down to save the innocent people of this town, and to save myself. I carried my hard case into the room and set it on the desk. I opened the laptop to prepare the cover letter for the Oversight Bureau. A secure message window was blinking in the center of the screen. It was red, high priority. I clicked it open. It was from Julian, my boss at Northbridge. "Claire," the message read, "we are auditing the internal access logs for the entire Northeast Division. We have flagged unauthorized use of our proprietary forensic tools from an unsecured IP address in Pennsylvania." My stomach dropped. "If you have been using restricted tools off-site for personal matters, we need to talk. Immediately. Call me now. This is a termination-level event." I stared at the screen. The walls had closed in. Merriwick was trying to frame me for fraud. Northbridge was about to fire me for investigating it. I was cornered. I looked at the burner phone. I looked at the envelope from Elliot. My double life was over. The two worlds had collided. I had to choose. Save my career or save the town? I reached for the phone. The red notification box from Northbridge Risk Analytics pulsed on my screen like a heartbeat. "Call me now." I sat in the dim motel room, the cursor hovering over the exit button. If I called Julian, I would have to explain why I was in Merriwick. I would have to explain the connection to Gerald Peterson. And once Northbridge realized that Sarah Bennett was actually Claire Peterson, a woman with a radioactive history in the academic world, I would be fired for cause. My career, the fortress I had built to protect myself, would evaporate. But if I did nothing, the Merriwick Civic Trust would be gutted by Friday. I closed the laptop. I did not call Julian. Instead, I sent a brief, carefully worded text via the secure app. Device compromised by public Wi-Fi. Locking down immediately. Will report for diagnostic scan on Monday. It was a stall tactic. It bought me 48 hours. I turned my attention to the manila envelope Elliot had given me. It contained the smoking gun, the internal audit proving the forgery and the money laundering. I added my own leverage, the timeline of the Reller invoices, and the corresponding withdrawals I had reconstructed. I could not submit this as Sarah Bennett, and I could not submit it as Claire Peterson, the daughter. I chose the middle path, the path of the ghost. I drove 30 miles to a 24-hour copy center in the next county. I wore a baseball cap and paid in cash. I made 3 copies of the entire dossier. I placed one in a heavy envelope addressed to the Harrington Financial Integrity Bureau, the state oversight agency that handled municipal corruption. I placed the second in an envelope addressed to Elliot's compliance officer at Crane Capital, marked Anonymous Whistleblower. I wiped my fingerprints from the paper using a microfiber cloth before sealing them. I drove to a blue mailbox outside a post office in a town I had never visited before and dropped them in. It was done. The fuse was lit. I just didn't know if the explosion would kill the monster or bring the roof down on my own head. The summons came the next morning. It was not a request. It was a command. Hank Reller called my father's house landline while I was there picking up my resume papers. Gerald answered, listened for 10 seconds, and then handed the phone to me without a word. "Hello?" I said. "Be at the trust office at 2 o'clock, Hank said. His voice was tight, coiled like a spring. "We are finalizing the rescue package. Since you are listed as an advisor, we need you in the room." "I am not an advisor." "Hank," I said, "you are on the paper." "Claire," he said, "so be in the room. Unless you want to explain to the board why you were too busy to help save the town." He hung up. I looked at Gerald. He was staring at the kitchen counter, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked smaller today, as if the air was slowly leaking out of him. "You have to go," he muttered. "You know what he is doing." "Dad," I said, "he wants me there so he can say I was part of the decision. He is setting me up." Gerald wiped a crumb from the counter. "It is standard procedure. Claire, stop being so dramatic. We are saving the factory. Just put on a nice blouse. Try to look professional for once." I went to my car. I checked my phone. I had a text from Ruth Mallory. "Emergency meeting. Hank is presenting the final transfer documents. He is insisting on a unanimous vote. Gerald is listed as the witness again. Be careful." I took a breath. This was the trap closing. If I walked into that room, I was validating their narrative. If I stayed away, they would vote without me. And I would be the negligent advisor who disappeared when things got tough. I had to go in. But I wasn't going in to sign. I was going in to stall. The conference room at the Merriwick Civic Trust was too hot. The thermostat was broken, blasting dry heat that made everyone's skin shine with a sheen of sweat. The board members were seated around the oval table. Ruth Mallory looked pale. The other 3 members, local business owners who looked tired and overwhelmed, were shuffling papers nervously. Hank Reller stood at the head of the table. He was wearing a suit that cost $2,000, but he couldn't hide the sweat stains under his arms. He looked like a man running out of time. My father sat to his right, clutching a pen like it was a lifeline. Hank cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he said. "As you know, the situation with Keystone Vale is critical. We have secured a partner for the debt restructuring, but we need to move the trust's liquid assets into the secured holding account by close of business today." He tapped a stack of documents in front of him. "This authorizes the final transfer," he said. "It puts the park land, the library fund, and the scholarship endowment under the management of Merriwick Redevelopment Partners. It is the only way to guarantee the loan." He slid the papers down the table. "We need signatures. Now." I sat at the far end of the table, next to Dana. She had come as an observer, or perhaps as a cheerleader for the family legacy. She was watching Hank with wide, trusting eyes. I raised my hand. It was a small movement, tentative. "Mr. Reller?" I said. Hank stopped. His jaw tightened. "We are in a hurry." "Claire," he said. "I know," I said, keeping my voice soft, the voice of the confused daughter. I was looking at the previous transfer receipts, the ones for the scholarship fund." Gerald looked up, panic flaring in his eyes. "Not now." "Claire," Gerald hissed. "I am sorry." "Dad," I said, "I just want to understand." "The receipt says the money went to Reller Site Services for educational consulting, but then Reller Site Services sent the same amount to MRP Holdings the next day." I looked around the table, making eye contact with the confused board members. I looked up MRP Holdings. I continued, "It is a Delaware company. Does the trust have a scholarship program in Delaware?" The room went silent. The hum of the heater sounded like a jet engine. Hank's face turned a mottled shade of red. "That is an intercompany logistical transfer," he snapped. "It is how we handle overhead." "Overhead?" I asked, blinking innocently. "But the scholarship fund was $400,000. Are you saying the overhead was 100%? Hank slammed his hand on the table. "You do not understand complex finance," he shouted. "This is why you are sitting at the kids' table. Claire, we are moving assets to protect them from market volatility." Dana shifted in her seat. She looked at Hank, then at me. "Hank," she said. Her voice was steady, professional. She was the MBA now. "Actually," she asked a valid question. Dana said, "If the funds are for collateral, they should be in an escrow account, not a holding company. Why is the money moving through your service firm? That creates a tax liability." Hank turned his glare on Dana. "Oh, look at that," he sneered. "The wedding planner thinks she is a CFO." Dana froze. "I'm not a wedding planner. I have a master's in business administration." "Yeah, well, this is the real world." "Sweetheart," Hank said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Not some classroom theory. We do not have time for your little sweetheart accounting questions. We have jobs to save." He turned back to the board. "Sign the papers, or explain to the town why the factory closed on your watch." I watched Dana. The insult had landed like a slap. Sweetheart accounting. She had spent her entire life trying to be the perfect, successful professional, trying to distance herself from the messiness of our family. And in 2 seconds, Hank had reduced her to a decoration. She looked at the papers in front of her, then she looked at Gerald. "Dad," she said, "why is the money in Delaware?" Gerald didn't answer. He was staring at the table, his face gray. "Just sign it, Dana," Gerald whispered. "Please, just sign it so we can go home." Dana looked at him, and I saw something break in her eyes. It was the illusion. The golden light she had always cast on our father was flickering out. She realized, finally, that he wasn't protecting us. He was begging us to jump off the cliff with him. "I cannot sign this," Ruth Mallory said. She pushed the papers away. "I am not signing anything until I see an audit of that Delaware account." Hank's eyes bulged. "You will sign it," he roared. "You are legally obligated." "No, she isn't," I said. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I forced my voice to be hard. The bylaws require a 48-hour review period for asset transfers over $50,000. If you force a vote now, it is void. Hank looked at me with pure hatred. "You little bitch," he said quietly. Gerald stood up. I think we should take a recess," he stammered. 5 minutes, just to cool down." Hank looked at Gerald with disgust. 5 minutes. Hank spat. "Control your daughters, Gerald, or I will control them for you." He stormed out of the room. I followed Gerald into the hallway. He walked fast, heading for the back exit, like an animal trying to escape a cage. "Dad, stop!" I called out. He spun around near the water fountain. He was breathing hard, clutching his chest. "What have you done?" he gasped. "You are ruining everything." Hank was going to fix it. "He promised me." "He promised you what?" I asked, stepping closer. "That he wouldn't let you go to jail?" "He promised me respect," Gerald shouted. His voice echoed in the empty corridor. He slumped against the wall, the fight draining out of him. He told me I was the only one who understood the vision. Gerald said, his voice trembling, He said the other board members were small-minded. He said if I helped him move the money, we would build something huge, a legacy. He said I would be the man who saved Merriwick. I looked at him. It was so pathetic, so human. He just wanted to matter. He used you? Dad, I said. He saw a man who was insecure about his education, a man who was desperate for validation, and he played you like a fiddle. He stole that money, and he made you sign the check so he could blame you when it vanished. Gerald shook his head, tears leaking from his eyes. No, no. We are partners. You are not partners, I said. You are the witness. You are the patsy. I pulled the forged consulting agreement from my pocket. I unfolded it and held it up. And this? I asked. Why is my name on this? Gerald looked at the paper. He closed his eyes. Hank said we needed a layer, he whispered. He said if the bank asked questions, we needed to show we had an advisor, he said. He said nobody would check your credentials because nobody expects anything from you. The cruelty of it took my breath away. It wasn't just a crime. It was a dismissal of my entire existence. So you sold me. I said, you were willing to let me go to prison for fraud because you thought I was worthless anyway. Gerald opened his eyes. They were wet, red-rimmed, and filled with a terrifying resolve. You are young, he said. You can start over. People expect you to fail. Claire, it is part of your story. But me? If I go down, I lose everything. I lose the respect. I lose the house. I lose Dana's admiration. He straightened up, wiping his face. You have to take the fall. Claire, it is the only way. You sign the paper. You say you advised the transfer. We tell them it was a mistake, a miscalculation. You get a slap on the wrist. You leave town again. I stared at him. He was serious. He was asking me to destroy my life to preserve his delusions. I am giving you a choice. Dad, I said, my voice cold. You go back in there and tell the board the truth. You tell them Hank pressured you. You tell them about the Delaware account. We can fight this together, or what? He challenged. Or I walk away. I said, and I leave you to Hank. Gerald sneered. The fear curdled into anger. You won't walk away, he said. You are too weak. You are uneducated and you are worthless. You never became anything. Claire, you are just a shadow. Shadows don't fight back. He turned and reached for the door handle to go back into the meeting. At that moment, a phone buzzed, then another, then the sound of a notification ping from inside the conference room. Gerald paused. My burner phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a news alert from the Merriwick Gazette app. Breaking. State investigators open inquiry into Merriwick Civic Trust. It happened fast. Faster than I thought possible. The Harrington Bureau must have flagged the keywords in my tip immediately. The door to the conference room burst open. Ruth Mallory stood there, holding her phone, her face white. Gerald, she said, the Bureau just emailed the board. They have issued a cease and desist on all asset transfers. They are freezing the accounts. Gerald froze. The color drained from his face until he looked like a wax figure. What? He whispered. Hank appeared behind Ruth. He looked at his own phone, then at Gerald. His expression was no longer one of annoyance. It was the look of a trapped animal preparing to kill. Who talked? Hank said. His voice was a low growl. Who called them? He looked at Ruth. He looked at Gerald. And then he looked at me. I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. The hallway was silent for a heartbeat. And then the chaos began. The other board members were shouting, asking what it meant. Ruth was crying. Dale Orwin posted his teaser article at that exact moment. My phone pinged again. Merriwick Civic Trust under scrutiny. Questions about signatures. The headline didn't name me, but it mentioned irregularities involving family members of board officers. The town's gossip machine was already igniting. I could feel it. The phones in the room started ringing. Hank stepped into the hallway. He ignored the board members. He walked straight up to Gerald and me. He was close enough that I could smell the peppermint breath mint masking the scent of fear. He cornered us against the wall. You stupid old man. Hank hissed at Gerald. You couldn't keep your mouth shut, could you? I didn't say anything, Gerald stammered. I swear. Hank. Hank turned to me. He smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. And you, he said, the little ghost. You think you are clever? I didn't do anything. I lied, keeping my face blank. Hank leaned in. His eyes were dead, if the feds are involved. Nobody wins. Claire, but I have resources. I have lawyers. Your father? He has nothing. And you? He chuckled darkly. I know about your past. Claire, I know about the university. I know why you changed your name. If you think you can pin this on me, I will make sure every reporter in the state knows exactly who you are. I will paint you as the mastermind. I will make you famous in the worst way. He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs. Fix this, Gerald, he commanded. Tell them it was a clerical error. Get the freeze lifted, or I start talking. He turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. I looked at my father. He was sliding down the wall, clutching his chest, gasping for air. It is over. He wheezed. It is all over. I looked down at him. I felt a strange detachment. I had offered him a lifeline, and he had tried to strangle me with it. It is not over. Dad, I said, it is just starting. Dana came out of the conference room. She saw Gerald on the floor and ran to him. Daddy, she cried. What is wrong? He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. She did it. Gerald rasped, pointing a shaking finger at me. Claire, she called them. She ruined us. Dana looked up at me. Her face was a mask of confusion and betrayal. Claire? She asked. Why? I didn't answer. I couldn't explain that I had just saved her inheritance from being stolen. I couldn't explain that I had just stopped a felony in progress. I turned and walked away. I walked out of the building, into the cold, gray afternoon. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was crashing. I checked my phone. Another message from Northbridge. Final warning. Contact administration. And a message from Elliot. Package received. The bank just got a call from the AG's office. You started a war. Claire, I started the engine. Hank was right about one thing. I was about to become famous. The question was whether I would be the villain or the hero. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they called me. I only cared about winning. I put the car in gear. I had one more stop to make. I needed to prepare for the public forum tomorrow. If Hank wanted to make me famous, I was going to give him a show he would never forget. I woke up on the morning of the town forum with a strange sense of calm. For 6 years, I had lived with a low-level hum of anxiety, a constant white noise telling me that if I stepped into the light, I would be destroyed. I had built a fortress of encryption and fake names to keep the world out. But as I stared at the ceiling of the motel room, watching the dust motes dance in a shaft of gray sunlight, I realized the fortress had become a prison. I checked my phone. There was a voicemail from Julian at Northbridge. I did not listen to it. I knew what it said. My career as Sarah Bennett was over. I had breached protocol. I had exposed my location, and I had used company resources for a personal vendetta. By Monday morning, my access would be revoked, and my laptop would be a brick. I felt a pang of grief for the life I was losing. I had liked Sarah Bennett. She was competent. She was respected. She was safe. But Sarah Bennett could not save Merriwick. Only Claire Peterson could do that. I got out of bed and dressed. I did not put on the shapeless gray suit I had worn all week. I put on the dark navy blazer I usually reserved for boardroom presentations. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe knot. I put on my glasses. I opened the hard case and took out the dossier. I packed the original invoices, the forged agreement, and the timeline of transactions. I put the flash drive with the digital audit in my pocket. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was not the uneducated daughter. She was not the family embarrassment. She was a senior forensic analyst who had hunted down cartels and corrupt CEOs. It is time to introduce yourself, I whispered. The Merriwick Town Hall was a brick building that smelled of floor wax and history. By the time I arrived, the auditorium was overflowing. The news of the state inquiry had spread like wildfire. The workers from Keystone Vale were there, wearing their union jackets. The teachers were there. The shop owners were there. The air in the room was heavy, charged with the static electricity of a mob looking for a target. I saw my family on the stage. Gerald was sitting at a long table, looking like a man facing a firing squad. His skin was the color of old parchment. Dana sat behind him, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the floor. Hank Reller stood at the podium, adjusting the microphone, his face set in a mask of arrogant confidence. I did not go to the family seating area. I stood in the back, near the double doors, leaning against the wall. I wanted to see the whole board. Hank tapped the microphone. The screech of feedback cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hank said. His voice was smooth, practiced. "We are here to address the rumors. I know you are worried. I know you have seen the headlines. But let me assure you, the Merriwick Civic Trust is solvent. The freeze on our accounts is a standard bureaucratic procedure, a misunderstanding that we are clearing up as we speak." "Liars," someone shouted from the back. Hank held up a hand. "Please, we are all neighbors here. We all want the same thing. We want Keystone Vale to stay open. We want this town to thrive." He pointed to my father. "Gerald Peterson has served this community for 30 years. Hank said. "He has worked tirelessly to secure a rescue package for the factory. But in his zeal to help, mistakes were made. Paperwork was rushed." I watched Gerald. He flinched at the word mistakes. He looked at Hank with the eyes of a beaten dog. A woman stood up in the third row. It was Mila Serrano. My heart swelled. She was risking everything to be here. "Mr. Reller," Mila said, her voice shaking but clear. "I work at the bank. I saw the transfers. The money did not go to an escrow account. It went to a company in Delaware. Why?" The crowd erupted. Questions were shouted from every direction. "Where is the money? Who signed the checks? Are our pensions gone?" Hank wiped sweat from his forehead. He leaned into the mic, his voice hardening. "The financial structure is complex," he shouted over the noise. "It required outside advisors. We relied on the people who prepared the documents." He was pivoting. He was setting up the kill. Dale Orwin, the reporter, stood up near the front. "Who prepared the documents?" "Hank?" Dale asked. "Who was the advisor?" Hank smiled. It was a small, cruel twitch of his lips. He scanned the room until his eyes found me in the back. He pointed, a long, accusatory finger. "The trust employed a consultant to handle the administrative details." Hank said, "We wanted to keep it in the family. We wanted to give a chance to someone who needed a break." The heads of 300 people turned to look at me. "Gerald's daughter," Hank said. "Claire. She returned to town 2 weeks ago. She handled the filing. She handled the signatures." The room went deadly silent. I could feel the weight of their judgment. To them, I was the prodigal daughter, the failure who had come back to leech off her father. "Gerald?" Dale asked. "Is this true? Did Claire do the paperwork?" Gerald looked at the crowd. He looked at Hank. He looked at me. I saw the struggle in his face. He wanted to be a good man, but more than that, he wanted to survive. He wanted to protect the lie that he was competent, that he was educated, that he was in charge. If he blamed me, he remained the victim. If he told the truth, he was the fool. Gerald looked down at his hands. "Claire was helping out," he mumbled. "She wanted to be involved. She presented the documents to me. I trusted her." A gasp went through the room. Hank nodded, satisfied. "There you have it," he said. "We were misled by an inexperienced advisor. We are victims of nepotism. Folks, we tried to help a family member, and she made a mess of the compliance. The uneducated daughter who did the paperwork, that is your culprit." He looked at me with a smirk. "Claire, maybe you should explain to these good people why you moved their money to Delaware." The trap had snapped shut. They had successfully painted me as the villain. But they had made one mistake. They thought I was still the girl who ran away. I pushed off the wall. I walked down the center aisle. My heels clicked rhythmically on the linoleum floor. I did not look down. I looked straight at Hank Reller. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. I did not move the money. I said, my voice was not loud, but it was steady. It carried to the back of the room. Hank laughed into the mic. Of course you deny it. But your signature is on the consent forms. My name is on the forms, I corrected, but I did not sign them. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope. I held it up. This is a forensic audit of the document metadata. I said, the consulting agreement was created on a computer registered to Reller Site Services on March 4th. At that time, I was in Boston. I have toll booth records and credit card receipts to prove it. I took a step closer. The signature on the document was penciled in. The pressure points matched the handwriting of the witness. Gerald Peterson. The crowd murmured. Hank's smile faltered. That is ridiculous. Hank said, you are lying. You are a dropout with a history of fraud. Who is going to believe you over the word of the Civic Trust? I walked up the stairs to the stage. I stood next to the podium. I was shorter than Hank, but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. I am not a dropout, I said, and I am not just Gerald's daughter. I turned to the audience. My name is Claire Peterson, but for the last 5 years, I have worked as a senior risk analyst for Northbridge Risk Analytics in Chicago. A ripple of shock went through the room. Dana's head snapped up. Gerald's mouth fell open. I am a certified fraud examiner, I continued. I specialize in forensic accounting and asset tracing. I investigate corporate embezzlement for Fortune 500 companies. I looked at Hank. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. I did not come back to town to ask for money. I said, I came back because I track anomalies. And when I looked at the trust's books, I saw a pattern I recognize. It is called layering. It is a technique used to wash funds through shell companies. I opened the folder and pulled out the enlarged charts I had made at the copy shop. I held them up for the crowd. Here is the timeline, I said, pointing to the red lines connecting the accounts. Money leaves the trust. It goes to Reller Site Services for construction work that was never done. Then it moves to MRP Holdings in Delaware, and from there, it moves into personal accounts held by Hank Reller and Paul Reller. Lies, Hank shouted. He grabbed for the microphone, but I stepped in front of him. I have already submitted this evidence to the Harrington Financial Integrity Bureau. I said, they opened the file this morning. That is why your assets are frozen. Hank, not because of a clerical error, because they found the money in your private account. The room exploded. People were standing, shouting, pointing at Hank. The anger that had been directed at me shifted instantly, focusing like a laser on the man in the expensive suit. Hank looked around wildly. He saw the tide turning. He saw the workers moving toward the stage. He turned on me. He dropped the mask of the benevolent businessman. You are a fraud, he screamed, his face purple. Do not listen to her. She was expelled from university for cheating. She changed her name because she is a criminal. The room quieted slightly. The accusation hung in the air. It was the only weapon he had left. I looked at the crowd. I looked at Dale Orwin, who was scribbling furiously in his notebook. He is right, I said. The crowd gasped. Dana looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. 6 years ago, I was accused of academic dishonesty. I said, I was the research assistant for a professor who falsified his data to get a grant. When he was caught, he blamed me. He said I was the one who cooked the books. I was 22. I didn't have the money for a lawyer. I was expelled, and my name was blacklisted. I took a deep breath. It was the first time I had said the words out loud in public. I changed my professional name so I could get a job. I said, but I did not change who I was. That experience taught me one thing. If you do not document the truth, a liar will write your history for you. I held up the dossier again. That is why I document everything now. I said, that is why I have the receipts. That is why I have the timestamps. Because I will never let a man like you destroy me again. I turned to my father. Gerald was sitting frozen at the table. He looked small. He looked old. The illusion of his importance had been stripped away, leaving only the frightened man underneath. Dad, I said. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. You have a choice. I said, "You can keep lying for him. You can keep pretending you are the big man who runs the town, or you can tell the truth." Hank grabbed Gerald's shoulder. "Gerald, tell them," Hank hissed. "Tell them she is crazy." Gerald looked at Hank's hand on his shoulder. Then he looked at me. He saw the daughter he had called worthless. He saw the woman who had just dismantled a complex financial crime in front of 300 people. He stood up. He shook Hank's hand off. "I didn't read them," Gerald said. His voice was a whisper. Louder. Someone shouted from the crowd. "I didn't read the documents," Gerald shouted. He was crying now. Ugly. Jagged sobs. "I just signed them. I wanted to be important. I wanted to be the one who saved the factory. But I didn't know what I was doing." He looked at the crowd. His hands held out in supplication. "I never finished college," he admitted. The confession tore out of him. "I lied to you all. I am not an educated man. I was ashamed. And because I was ashamed, I let Hank tell me what to do. I signed your money away because I was afraid to ask questions." He sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The room was silent. It wasn't the silence of anger anymore. It was the silence of pity. They saw him for what he was, a broken, foolish old man. At that moment, the double doors at the back of the hall opened. 4 men and women in dark windbreakers walked in. On the back of their jackets, in yellow letters, were the words, "State Investigator." They walked down the aisle. One of them held up a piece of paper. "Hank Reller?" the lead agent called out. Hank looked at the agents. He looked at the back exit behind the stage. "This is a mistake," Hank shouted. "My lawyers will have your badges." He turned and bolted for the rear door. He didn't make it. 2 uniformed officers were waiting in the wings. They stepped out and blocked his path. Hank skidded to a halt, looking trapped. The lead agent walked up the stairs and handcuffed him. "Hank Reller, you are being detained for questioning regarding the embezzlement of municipal funds." The agent said, as they marched Hank past me. He stopped. He looked at me with pure venom. "You are nothing," he spat. "You are still nothing." I looked him in the eye. "I am the one who caught you," I said. The chaos after the forum lasted for hours. The agents took statements. The board members resigned en masse. Gerald was questioned but not arrested. At least, not yet. His cooperation and his public confession had bought him some leniency, though his reputation was ashes. By the time I walked out to the parking lot, the sun was setting. The sky was a brilliant, bruised purple. "Claire." I turned. Dana was standing by her car. Her perfect hair was windblown, and her makeup was smudged. She looked like she had been crying. She walked over to me. She didn't hug me. We weren't a hugging family. I didn't know. She said, "About Northbridge, about your job. You never asked." I said, "You were too busy telling me I was a failure." Dana flinched. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I wanted to be the successful one," she said. Her voice was small. "It sounds terrible, but it is true. I liked that you were a mess. It made me feel secure. It made me feel like I was winning." She looked at me, really looked at me. "For the first time in years, you were hiding," she said, "because of us. I was hiding because it was safer than being your sister." I said. Dana nodded. She wiped a tear from her cheek. "Elliot is furious," she said. "He says he might call off the wedding. He says he cannot marry into a family that is under federal investigation. I am sorry." "Dana," I said. "Are you?" she asked. I thought about it. I thought about the way she had treated me at the dinner. I thought about the way she had sided with Gerald. "I am sorry you are hurting," I said, "but I'm not sorry I stopped them." Dana looked at the ground. "What happens now?" she asked. "Are you staying?" "No." I said, "My job is gone. I have to go back to Chicago and pack up my life. I have to find a new name. Maybe start over." "You could stay," she said. We could try to fix this. Dad needs us." I shook my head. "Dad needs to face the consequences of his own life." I said, "And so do you." I opened my car door. "I am not your savior." Donna, and I am not your punching bag anymore. If you want to know me, the real me, not the story you tell yourself, you can call me, but do not call me to fix Gerald. Call me because you want a sister. I got into the car. Claire, Dana said, stepping forward. Thank you. I looked at her through the open window. For what? For telling the truth. She said, even though we didn't deserve it. I nodded. I started the engine. I drove out of the parking lot, leaving Merriwick in the rearview mirror. The town was still there. The factory would probably be saved. Now that the theft was exposed and the assets could be recovered, the people would survive. My father was ruined. My sister was heartbroken. My career was in tatters. I was unemployed. I was exposed. I was alone. But as I hit the highway, accelerating into the darkness, I felt a strange, soaring lightness in my chest. I was no longer Sarah Bennett. I was no longer the uneducated daughter. I was Claire Peterson. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of anyone knowing my name. Thank you so much for listening to Claire's story. It was a journey of vindication, family secrets, and the courage it takes to reclaim your own narrative. I hope you felt the tension of every revelation as much as I did while writing it. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. Did you agree with Claire's decision to walk away at the end? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice and redemption. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. I read every single one. See you in the next story.